Hello and welcome to this video, which is kind of a request from amazing keyboard player and all-round good guy Toby Hounsham. And this is about fitting together two pieces of audio. So these are nearly at the same tempo, but not quite. And they're not just short loops. So it's much more challenging to fit these kind of things together than it is when it's just a 4 or an 8-bar loop or whatever. So it's a good example, and there's a few different ways you can approach it. So this is going to kind of be a bit of a rough and ready video because I'm just going to produce this on the fly. So first things first, obviously importing the samples. So these are just going to get copied into project audio folder, as always. Don't ever break that rule. And going to put them on different tracks. And the first thing first is you need to take a look at your audio, and we're going to have a look at the beginning, because the beginning of samples, when they're not prepared samples, often this is the first falling point, and you can see they start at different places. So we're already in a bit of a position. So what we need to do is to turn snap off and then just going to roughly adjust them. Just make sure we've still got the audio in there. Turn snap back on and then move both of them back over to start at bar 1, beat 1, and then zoom in properly. And you need to get these super accurate. So, you know, go to sort of wave level, really, really tight. So make sure you turn snap off. That one looks like that starts there, and the other one looks like it starts about there. Once you've done that, turn snap back on, pop them there. And now we have a reasonable starting point for what we're going to do. So quickly auditioning them, we've got Super Cheese Casio Keyboard Festival with some handy drums at the beginning, and then off we go to the races. And on the other one, we've got this drum brute track. Pretty straightforward stuff. So there are a number of different approaches you can take to this, so I'm just going to look at a few. The first one is, what you can do is you could just decide, you know what, I'm only going to have a bar, 4 bars or whatever of the drum brute, and make that loop and then stretch that to fit the Casio. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at that, which is probably not the approach I'd normally take, but here we go. So let's just listen for 4 bars of the drums. 2, 3, 4, and there it is. So that's the beginning of bar 5. So this is where we'll cut it. And again, we need to zoom right in as tight as you can. Make sure snap's turned off. And then with your scissors, you'd cut it there. And then you need to audition whether or not it will loop. So we'll just select that, hit P, turn cycle on, which would be the divide sign on a numeric keypad, and then go back to the beginning. It will play. And what you need to listen for is whether you can hear it loop, if it sounds like it's got, you know, one leg longer than the other, etc. If it doesn't sound right, it's not right. And it's really important that you don't look at the screen when you do this, because it's really easy to look at it and just think, yeah, that's right, or whatever. See, just look away from the screen and see if you can hear it. Hear if you can hear it even. So that sounds fine to me. So that, I think, is a loop, and that would be perfectly acceptable to go with. It's probably okay. So if you use 1 bar, it tends to be a bit much. But if you use 4 bars, 5 bars, etc., 5. If you use 4 bars, etc., generally you're okay, you know, or go up in 8, powers of 2, 16, etc. That's fine. Now, what we need to do is to match it to the Casio's tempo. So this is potentially a little more tricky. Now, there is tempo detection in Cubase, but it doesn't always work well. So we're going to try it and see how it does. So this is how you do tempo detection in Cubase. So the first things first is you generally want to trim it, as I have done. So bar 1, beat 1 of the music is where bar 1, beat 1 of Cubase is. And then you select here and go to project, and then tempo detection. I'm pretty sure this is Cubase Pro only, so we'll have to just deal with that later. We click tempo detection. You see it says Casio. We're going to click analyze. And straight away, a few things have happened. So a signature track has appeared. Our signature has changed to 1/4. A tempo track has appeared, and we've got some tempos in there now. So if we close that up, in fact, I'm just going to make them a little shorter so the audio is still the function, the feature of what we're looking at. Now, if I turn the click on and I'm going to mute the drum brute, apart from the fact we're only getting ones because we're in 1/4, it sounds like it's reasonable. So let's change a couple of things. I've turned cycle off, and also I'm going to change this here. So I'm going to go back to the arrow tool, select that there, and change to 4/4. So now we're in more sensible territory. Now, you'll notice that the tempo is changing as we go. Now, this may actually be happening. Certainly, I think it was, because I think the Casio's tempo probably does drift over time. Certainly, when I looked at it earlier on, yeah, it seems to. But that's probably okay. Now, you can change the tempo track, make it all fit, etc. But that, in this case, has worked. It doesn't often work for me. I almost never do it for precisely that reason. But now that that is working, all we need to do is to make the drum brute fit into there, and then we'll be in business. So the rough and ready way to do this would be to time stretch the drum brute to fit every 4 bars. Now that's changing, so actually you may notice that it drifts in between, but we're just going to do it, say, the rough and ready way. And we can see that at the moment the end of the drum brute sample is a little bit late for bar 5, and we want to move that. So we would select the object selection tool, the arrow, and you can select it multiple ways. Now I'm going to turn the tool buttons back on, and you can click and hold here and pick time stretch there, or you can press 1 on your main keypad and cycle through the different modes. Once you've done that, make sure you've got snap turned on, click on the end of our drum brute sample, and then move that over. And now, in that first part, that is going to fit perfectly within there. So we'll hit P, turn cycle on, press play, and play the two together. I'll turn the click off. So you can hear that's working reasonably well. Now, what you'll probably find is if you then delete this and then do this every time, you can see the length is slightly different each time. So here the length is 4 bars long, there it's 3.3, there it's 3.3, etc. So they vary slightly, and the reason they vary slightly is because this is staying the same, but the tempo of the song is changing. You can fix that pretty quickly by grabbing it in time stretch mode and just re-time stretching it so that it stays at 4 bars. But occasionally you'll see there'll be a little tweak like that, and it's not exactly bang on. And sometimes you have to stretch the beginning. I think that's a little weird bug. That's certainly been around for a long time. But generally what you'll find is you'll be able to just move them and then time stretch them to fit exactly. So again, move it to the beginning and then time stretch it, move it and time stretch it, etc. And that will work reasonably well. It's not ideal, but it does work. Now let's look at a different way of doing this from the starting point. So here we are back at our starting point, and the issue we have is that we want to get this and this to fit together. So this is another way to do it. And again, we're going to detect the tempo of the Casio part. So once more, we go to Project, Tempo Detection. We'll click Analyze. We're going to correct the issue with the time signature. And again, I'll move the time signature and tempo up so they are not the main focus of what we are looking at. And now what we're going to do is we're going to try and use Cubase's audio quantize to make the drum brute fit to the Casio. Now, the handy part about this drum brute part is that it's very easy to get hit points on there, and that makes quantizing in audio much easier. So we'll open that up in the bottom zone. And as we can see, if we go to hit points here, if we start altering this level here, you can see that there are no hit points. So you see that there are no vertical lines here. And as I bring that threshold down, some of them start getting captured. In fact, here, all of them are getting captured and they're all good. So you can see all the way through the whole consistent part. It's fine. That's got all those. Once you've got those, it's a simple case, he said, of saying create warp markers. So warp markers from hit points mean that now we've got something that Cubase can grab onto and quantize the audio. So you can see those have just turned into warp markers. Once we're done with that, we can close that and let's go to, let's say about bar 17, because it certainly will have drifted off by there. So you can see that this drum beat here, the drums are a bit slower than the Casio, so they're a bit behind. So what we need to do to fix that is to make sure our quantize is set to quarter. We make sure audio warp quantize is turned on, otherwise nothing will happen. So make sure that's turned on, and then we hit Q, and you'll see this will jump across, and this will jump across to there, etc. And then we've solved the problem. So, and that's all fine and dandy. The problem we have is eventually all of those latenesses in this case will add up, and we can see here later on we get something weird happening. So we end up with a missed beat, and then we get two, and then another missed beat. It goes a bit over the place. And if we listen to this, we'll just listen to the drums with a click on. So now the drums are effectively upside down. We've ended up with this over here. Now there's a number of ways you can fix this, but the easiest way is to zoom in here, grab the scissors, cut that there, and then delete that part and move it across. So now at least our parts will be kind of in time. And this bit here, we can just go in and edit those warp markers, because what happens when you use audio warp quantize, it actually moves the warp markers. So you can always fix what it's done. So I'm just going to go into there, and we can see that what's at bar 74 should be at 74.2, because we get this really long sort of clap, which might be quite cool, but it's not what we're after. Going to grab that and move that over, and you see that snapping into position. It asks if we want a new version, and we do. And there we go. So that's fixed that, and now the rest of it will be in time. Whether it goes crazy at the end, often what happens at the end of a tempo detection thing is it will change tempo. So you see we go off all sorts of craziness here, but hopefully you'd have been finished by then. If not, you can just go in and fix these. But that means the whole thing is now in sync. That's all working and done and dusted. So that's another way of doing it, using audio warp quantize and audio warping it to a tempo that you've already got. Now, another way of doing this, there is another way. This is much more long-winded and manual, but if you have a version of Cubase or any other DAW that doesn't do those kind of automatic things, it's much more old school, and it's much more the kind of thing you would have had to do back in the day. So for the sake of not having to do it on both tracks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to roughly set the tempo as if we'd got it okay generally on the Casio, and then we're going to look at the drum brute, and I'll show you how you would do this. Say, old school, back in the day. This is how I would have done it prior to all of these amazing tools that do a lot of the work for you. So first things first, I'm just going to roughly set this tempo to where I think it should be. So if we listen to just the Casio, so that's where bar 5 should be. So if you don't have time warp tool, etc., then this is something that you'd end up doing. So back in the day, we'd manually just increase the tempo, and you can see that that beat there is moving until we get roughly right. So you see 137, and then you'd start making small increments, so maybe 137.5, and that's close enough for our purposes at the moment. So let's just say that's where we're going to be. That'll do. And as we've seen earlier on, we think it probably drifts anyway. So now that will be reasonably accurate. So let's just see if we're still accurate by 16 bars having gone by. So the beginning of bar 17. It's not quite on. So let's just make a small change. So Cubase is running just a little bit slowly. So 137.4. Nope, a bit different again. That will do. 137.275 gets us roughly there. Now, what we saw earlier on is that this beat here, the drums are running a bit slower. So all we need to do here, this is the manual old school way, kind of like you'd do with a sampler. We'll turn the grid off. I'm just going to cut that there. And then we're going to time stretch this to fit to that. So this is a bit like what we did earlier on over a longer period. It's counting though. So if we did it over 17 bars, we think, well, that's okay. So why not do it over at bar 33? So at bar 33, we're still going to be late, but we're going to be later than we were. So that one belongs to that. And then you think, well, okay, then we've done 32 bars. Let's go to bar 65 and see what we get. Now, this is in lieu of counting every beat, which is what you probably would have to do if you needed to do it that way. But let's just say this is the extent of the whole song, but you count it through the whole thing. And then we're just going to grab that, turn time stretch on by clicking on there, sizing applies time stretch, make sure our grid's turned on, and then we're going to time stretch that over to there. And now we should have something, it looks good there. If we zoom out, that looks reasonable. And if we listen to it with the drums, so we should be okay. And say it would really, you would do this over the whole length of the song, but I don't want to take that long to do it. Let's have a quick look, see if we're accurate at the end. So that one there, that's the end of the song. So that's where bar 109 should be. And I think that's the beat that belongs to it. So again, we'll cut it there. Go for time stretch. But now our tempo actually isn't perfectly accurate because of the way that it's drifted a bit. But that'll probably be okay for most of the song. So let's just have a listen. Select it somewhere here. Now, if you had a drum part which was much, much slower than this, then you would need to have worked that out previously, which you'd need to count through the whole thing, which could take a long time. It certainly isn't something that I'd do on screen. But once you know how many bars and beats it should be, you can just time stretch it to the appropriate length. So in this case, we just kind of got lucky because it was so close that we know the next beat that we hear from the drums belongs to the beat before of the Casio. So that works reasonably well. You'd have to listen through this and see whether the drift is acceptable, because we'll probably find at bar 17 it'll just be a little bit off, but then that might it doesn't sound objectionable to me, so maybe that would be okay. So here we are back at the starting point again, and this is another way to work, which often works really well if you've got samples where you know the tempo of, but unfortunately we don't know the tempo of either of these samples. But what we can do is have a reasonable stab at it and then let Cubase do all the work, and let's see how we end up. So the drum brute, let's just count some beats. So let's just go over 8 bars. So we're ignoring Cubase's tempo, so this is turned off, and we're just going to play it and count 8 bars. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we're done. So that beat there, which is currently at bar 8, slightly inconveniently, but there we go. So this should be the beginning of bar 9. And most importantly, to the left of the cursor, 8 bars have expired. So let's just cut that there. And if we click on this here, we can go to Project and then Beat Calculator, and we can put in the number of beats. So this is 32 beats because it's 8 bars of 4 beats. and it tells us the tempo of this is 137.02, which sounds reasonably familiar. So let's now take that number and put it into the audio pool. So the audio pool is under Media. It's Control or Command P, which is print in every other program in the known universe, but there we go. And now we can tell it that the drum brute has a tempo of 137.02. And if we make it a musical sample, this means that Cubase will automatically stretch it to fit the current tempo of the song. So let's see what happens now. The one thing that has happened is you see it's moved it to an interesting start position. So this can happen because its origin may be in the wrong place. So we probably need to retrim it because sometimes it's calculating things in terms of a tempo, which is then changed. So sometimes when you add this, you have to redo it. But let's see how we end up here. And also notice that it's been slightly tricky to do, but we'll just trim that and then put it there. And let's see if we get anything. So yeah, it's slowed it down drastically and made it fit with our tempo, which isn't what we want. So let's put the project back at, let's say 135. So it's different from what it was, but it isn't what it was. And that's time stretch that whole sample, which hopefully will fit. So if we've got the tempo roughly right, yeah, it doesn't look too bad. It's not perfect, but after 81 bars, that's not too bad. We'll live with that. Now we need to do the same for the Casio. So it's exactly the same process. So we will go back to the beginning. We'll listen to 8 bars of Casio. 2, 3. It's not going to be a million miles off. 4, 5, 6, 7. Here comes 8, and here comes. Right, so that there, so that's where bar 9 should start. So again, we turn snap off. We're going to cut it on this downward peak here. And then again, we've got 32 beats. We click on that there. We go to Project and Beat Calculator. Yeah, we have to put in 32 again because it loves 4. 137.31. So it's different, but only slightly different. So we'll just undo that there, go back to the pool, put in the tempo 137.31, make it musical. And again, we've got the same thing where its start point, etc., has got messed up because it was calculated in terms of the original tempo. So again, we'll just retrim that, turn snap back on, put it to the beginning. Notice that it doesn't quite like that. I've seen this a few times. Yeah, it's slightly strange. And there we go. So there's something weird happens with the handling of it, but if you zoom in enough, it normally sorts itself out. And now let's see if the two fit together. Yep, that's okay. I say it's not perfect. It's probably not going to be perfect because we haven't got that tempo detection. If we did it over 16 bars, etc., it would have been more accurate. So you can see by this, it's a little bit out. The upside of this is you can tweak it. So if you think, well, the Casio's going a little bit too slowly now, so we can change its tempo and its original tempo. So if we make that 0.32, you see it goes the wrong way. So we can make it maybe 0.28, maybe 0.27, etc. So you can just tweak this. Now, this really takes you back to the old school days of sample break looping, you know, where you used to have to tweak the controls on your Akai sampler and you were just seeing numbers. But that's got that in sync there. But then again, it may be out of sync elsewhere. But generally, you'll need to go later on in the song and see if it still works, but that sounds okay. And of course it's done the classic thing of moving that, so now we need to do that. And then see if bar 73 is now on. Yeah, we've gone too far, you see. I should have thought of that, shouldn't I? Right, so let's go back to 137.27, which may look okay there, but then what's the beginning like? Yeah, the beginning's off, so you'll take a bit of tweaking to get this because of its position, but it's got a bit of analog looseness towards the end. So there you go, a few different ways to slice the same job effectively. So depending on the source material you've got, sometimes the automatic detection, etc., will work really well, and it will just be a case of a couple of detections and you'll be off at the races. Other times you'll have to do a lot of work manually. And in the case of some samples where it's something long and maybe it's a human changing tempo, etc., and you want to massage that or make things fit together, then you may end up having to do work on nearly every bar. It's one of those things where it can vary wildly. And if you've got a machine playing it, unless it's a modern machine, it may well drift out of time anyway. So you could start out in sync and then drift one way, possibly the other, because as we all know, it's not just analog synths which used to drift out of tune. It also comes from digital synths where they maybe disagree on what the time is. So while they may be doing the same number of things in a second, they disagree on how long a second is, but that can also change over time depending on the device in question. So hopefully, although this is a long video and I've just ad hoc'd it, you found something useful in there. And if you have, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon for some more Music Tech Tuition.